Hey guys, it's November 2021 and I just completed the CKS certification. With that, I have completed all three Kubernetes certifications, CKA, CKAD, and CKS. In this video, I will share some tips, both technical and non-technical, around the CKS certification exam. On the technical side, I will start with some very basics and go over items that you should definitely be aware of. Let's start with the very basics. Let's display the nodes in this Kubernetes cluster. Get nodes. Note how it shows the nodes, the master, the worker 1, worker 2, and it also shows the version of Kubernetes. To see the labels assigned to these nodes, we just add the argument show labels, and that tells us the labels. Now to add a label from the command line, what you can do is you can use the label node command, specify the node name and then the label. Let's check the labels again. And there you go, our label has been added. You can add labels to a pod as well. First, let's quickly create a pod. Run pod 1. Let's use the image of Nginx. Instead of waiting, what you can do is you can use the W option, which stands for watch, and it's already running. So to add a label, use the same label command, specify the pod name and some random label. To display the labels, let's use show labels, and here's the label that we added. Let's delete the pod. And if you delete it this way, it will take quite some time. Let's spin up another pod. Let's use the watch command. And notice how the status changed from container creating to running. Now let's force delete the pod. And there you go, it's been deleted almost immediately. Another thing that comes up quite often in the exam is, the namespace. Let's do a dry run on a pod to just get the YAML file. So let's say you are in namespace 1 and you're trying to create a pod 2, image of Nginx. So when you run this command, it generates the YAML file for you, and notice how it specified the namespace as well, just by specifying it at the command line. So the namespace is under metadata in your YAML file, right? Let's create the pod one more time. And now let's get the logs of this pod. And it displays the logs. To execute a command on the pod, let's use the exec command. And it executes one command on the pod. Now, the question here is, what is this minus? What does it stand for? Let's do some deep dive on that. Let's say you have a file called my file and it has this pattern in it. Now, if I ask you to use grep to search for these hyphens, how would you do it? Logically, you would do this. This does not work. So the next thing you would do is you would add single quotes to it. Guess what? It still does not work. So the way to solve this is by using two hyphens and then the command. All right. Now you might be thinking, what exactly is this hyphen hyphen? So to answer that question, we need to do a man on bash. And it tells you right here, and let me go down, right here, a hyphen hyphen signals the end of options and disables further option processing. So let me give an example of that. Let's say I want to search for hyphen hyphen hyphen, this is line in my file. So this won't work because the case does not match. So the logical thing to do is to add -i, which makes that case insensitive. But you can't specify a -i based on what we just read. The -i needs to be before the hyphen hyphen. And that works. So that in a nutshell is what this hyphen hyphen is about. So back to our Kubernetes example. If we want to open a shell to the pod, this is the command we would use. All right. Let's check which user a pod runs as. To do that, let's create another pod with the image of busybox. Run pod bb. Image is busybox. But if you try to do this, notice that it fails. And the reason it fails is because we have not specified any command for it to run. So let's see. Read pod bb. Okay. Now let's go back and just generate the YAML file. And right here, let's specify a command. So this command will sleep for a day. All right. The new pod is running. I'll clear the screen just so it's easier to see. And let's execute the id command against this pod. And as you can see, it says it's running as user root. So let's try and change that. Let's edit the file again. And let's add a security context to it. All right, let's check to see if the pod is still running. It is. Let's delete it. And let's create the new one. Let's check the status. It's running again. So let's execute the id command again. And as you can see, it's now running as another user, not root, right? That's the important thing. You don't want the pod running as user root. Let's open the pod YAML file again. And this time, let's change the context a little. And to do that, what we'll do is we'll create another container, right? I'll just delete all this. So I'll call the first container container1 and the second container container2, and I'll change this to 1 hour, and I'll take this security context and I'll paste it against this one. All right, and in this case I'll change it to maybe 5,000 and 6,000 just to differentiate the two. Okay, replace minus. Alright, the new pod is running, and this time notice how it says 2 out of 2. So these are the two containers that we created within the pod. So that one pod has two containers. Now, if we run this command, which container will it run against? So it seems to be defaulting to container 1, and container 1 has the UID of 1000 and GID of 2000. If we need to run this command against the second container, we need to specify that using the -C option. And notice how it says the second container is running as a different UID and a different GID. So what this means is you can specify the security context and specify the user and group at a pod context, or you can also override it at the container level. This is a very important concept that you need to understand. If you do not specify the security context within the container, it will inherit it. But if you specify the security context, it will override it. Let's take it a step further and mount some volumes on each of the containers and then create some files on it to see the file ownership on the files. All right, let's open the file. In this case, I'm just creating a simple empty dir volume and then I'm mounting it on the container. I'm also mounting it on the other container. Let's get the names right. All right, let's try this. Let's check the pods. They're running. Let's exec into one of the pods. So instead of my wall, I made a mistake and I called it my call. So I'm going to go with that. All right, so we've created a file called testing and it has the UID of 1000 and GID of 2000. Let's exec into the second pod. Let's go into my call, my fault, create a file called testing. And as you can see, you can't create a file called testing because it's the exact same mount. We are just mounting it in a different folder structure. So let's create a file called testing2. And as you can see, testing2 has the new UID and GID. All right. Since Kubernetes communicates over SSL, we often need to reference the SSL key, the SSL cert, and the CA cert with a number of commands. When using these options, I noticed there was a pattern and wanted to bring that to your attention. First one is curl. To specify the key, use the -- key option. For the cert, use the -- cert option. And for the CA cert, use the --CA cert option. Up next is the HCD CTL tool. This is an example taken right from the documentation, and you would have probably seen this command before. Problem is, if you use this command as is, it will not work. And the reason for that is you need to specify the correct arguments. And these arguments are --key, --CA cert, and --cert. Finally, to create a secret of type TLS, you need to pass the option of --key and --CA cert. So as you can see, there is something common in all of these commands, and the options are pretty much the same. This is a quick overview of the various tools that are needed in the certification exam. When I was preparing for the exam, I was getting confused at times with all of these tools. So I prepared this table which helped me compare the various tools. Falco is an auditing tool. It just checks and it reports. SecComp and AppArmor act as a layer between the container and the host kernel. They intercept the sys calls. You can either use it from the command line or you can use it with Docker or Kubernetes. Claire and Trivy are vulnerability scanners. Claire is more complex. I think it has its own application with its database. I honestly haven't used it much. So if one of you have actually used it, maybe you can tell us in the comments how exactly it works. Trivy, on the other hand, is another vulnerability scanner. You can use it from the command line or you can use it as a Docker image. So the vulnerability scanners, they actually scan the images and they report the vulnerabilities. And these vulnerabilities are nothing but CVE numbers. You can Google these CVE numbers to find out what exactly the vulnerability is and how to address it. Next up are the non-technical tips. When I was preparing for this exam, I wasn't sure which course to take. I was kind of torn between Kim's course and Mumshad's course. For the CKA and CKAD, I took Mumshad's course, and in both of them I scored over 90%. For the CKS exam, I did not take Mumshad's course and I scored just over 70%. Okay, maybe it was not all about the course, maybe it was just me. But one of the main reasons I purchased the Udemy course from Kim is because it's a lifetime course. You can use it whenever you want. On the other hand, Mumshad's course is more subscription based. He has his own website, which means I have to pay a certain amount every month. And once the subscription ends, I no longer have access to the course. On the other hand, Udemy courses do not expire, right? And personally, I like to keep these courses as a reference in case I need to go back to them after I complete the certification. With Kim's course, there is no easy access to the labs. He provides 2 ways to set up the environment, and these steps work fine for the most part, but more on this later. One of them is to set it up on the cloud and the other one is on the laptop. The problem with this approach is after a while it gets a bit annoying, setting up the lab, destroying it and building it back. In my case, I use one of my laptops for building the environment, and initially it worked fine, but then I started encountering issue after issue and I was just not able to destroy the environment and build it back. Luckily, I had another laptop and I was able to use it for that purpose. But all of this took up a lot of my time I could have spent learning and practicing for the exam. To me, this was a very big deal. For CKA and CKAD, when I took Mumshad's Udemy course, after every chapter they were easy to follow labs. I really liked that format. You did not need to worry about building your own environment. Now, I did not take Mumshad's course for CKS and I don't know whether Mumshad follows the same format. If any of you watching this video knows about this, do let us know in the comments. I think it will greatly benefit the folks who are planning to take this exam. Another thing to point out is that Kim's course does not come with a simulation. The killer.sh simulation is actually bundled along with the actual exam. That is, when you purchase the actual CKS certification exam, you are given access to the killer.sh simulation. You get 2 attempts at the simulation. The simulation is structured such that you can only use it for a certain period. It's either 24 hours or 36 hours. Once that period ends, it expires. The point here is, if you purchase any other course, you still have access to the simulation. By purchasing Kim's course on Udemy, you do not get 2 extra attempts at the simulation exam. Something to keep in mind when you're shopping for a course. A few other non-technical tips. Keep in mind that the exam allows for an additional monitor. I was able to use an additional monitor with no problem at all. I felt that an external webcam could be very useful. Now my webcam was integrated into my laptop. When the proctor asked me to show him around the room, I had to actually move the entire laptop, which wasn't very convenient. Having an external webcam could make that very easy. I have read a few suggestions about using some kind of terminal multiplexer like Screen or tmux. I personally did not use one, but after taking the CKS exam, I can see why it could be useful. Say the question asks you to make a change to the Kube API server YAML file. You make that change and then you wait for the cluster to start up. If it doesn't start up, you troubleshoot, you realize you made a typo. So you make a change and you start all over again. But then you have to keep waiting every time you make a change for the cluster to start up. And these wait times could really add up. If you get familiar with a term tool like Screen or tmux, then you do not need to wait. You can simply open up another terminal and get started with the next question. Of course, you will mentally need to make a note of where you are in the question. And use this tool only if you're extremely comfortable with it. You do not want to use a new tool in your exam only to find out that you don't know your way around it. The exam does not do a good job of telling you how much time is left. There is some kind of bar at the very top and it keeps reducing over time. So when you start your exam, make a note of the time. Another tip is to add the time to your prompt. Let's try out these two. Okay, so in my case, when the exam started, the first thing I did is I stored the date into a file called start time. And this clearly told me what time I actually started the exam. And I could reference this at any point. To add the time to your prompt, let's take a look at the current value of the prompt. Save it to the file. Modify the file to contain the time. And then let's set the PS1 variable to the value of my prompt. There you go. Your prompt has your time as well. The final one I have is, how does grading work? Say you have a question which in turn has 4 sub-questions. You complete the first 3 and the last one you're not very sure. You make a change to some YAML file and then you realize the Kube API server does not come up. Do you roll back or do you leave it as it is? If you do not roll back and the Kube API server is down, does it mean you do not get any points for the first 3 that you completed? I really do not know the answer to this one. And that completes this video. All the best and thank you for watching.